I just want to give a big thank you to the University of Notre Dame for sponsoring this video. The University of Notre Dame run a Masters of Science in Global Health that is absolutely world class. So the world seems to have exploded with excitement at the fact that Dr. Tedros is the new Director General at the World Health Organization. An influenza pandemic, like something that we saw in 1917, the Spanish flu, that could kill, in this day and age, literally hundreds of millions of people. And I'm not being melodramatic, I mean literally hundreds of millions of people. The WHO needs to make sure that member states are ready for pandemics. These pandemics will come, and when they do, the WHO also needs to be able to coordinate an effective global response at that point in time. Right, let's take a look at Dr. Tedros. Dr. Tedros. To say that Dr. Tedros transformed the health system in Ethiopia between 2005 and 2012 is somewhat of an understatement. During that time frame, he improved health infrastructure. There were 3,500 new health centers built. 16,000 new health posts were made. We saw child mortality down by 2/3, HIV infections down by 90%, malaria mortality down by 75%, TB mortality down by 64%. He also strengthened the health workforce. He oversaw the training and deployment of 38,000 health extension workers. This created a community-driven system with women at its core, and it has been replicated in more than a dozen countries across Africa. During his tenure, the country training capacity went up from 3 medical schools training 120 doctors per year to 33 schools training 3,000 doctors a year. He also successfully tackled issues like stockouts of essential medicines, weak information systems, donor harmonization, and many, many others. Look, anybody that's been working in the global health space knows that to accomplish any one of these things is really impressive, but altogether, they really elevate Dr. Tedros to superhero status.
Tedros is really an outstanding person. I've known him from the time that he was the Minister of Health of Ethiopia. I mean, obviously, over the years, anyone who says that the WHO has not had problems has not been watching the WHO. But I think under his leadership, they've done very well. He has been all over this. I was on the phone with him a few hours ago, leading a WHO call.
Transparency, sir?
No, I'm not talking about China. You asked me about Tedros.
World Health Organization praising China for its transparency and leadership on their response to the pandemic?
You know, I can't comment on that because, I mean, I don't have any viewpoint into it. I mean, I don't even know what your question is.
Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus should be put on trial for crimes against humanity. This might seem like a hyperbolic statement, but I'm going to lay out the evidence for my case so you can make up your own mind about the director of the World Health Organization. Tedros, as well as being the first World Health Organization director without a medical degree, also has somewhat of a political background. On his online biography, you can see that he was the Ethiopian health minister from 2002 to 2012. It somehow neglects to mention his other role as the Ethiopian foreign minister from 2012 to 2017, before his WHO appointment. Now, I wonder why they would have left that out. Because aside from his medical credentials, Tedros also happens to be a member of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which is an organization about as peaceful as the name suggests. It was founded as a communist revolutionary party that came to power in 1991 and overthrew the Mengistu dictatorship, forming a coalition with 2 other ethnic parties. Over time, the TPLF, Tigray People's Liberation Front, began to exert more and more influence over the other 2 parties. In Ethiopia, most military generals and key leaders of the government are all Tigray, including the president who ruled Ethiopia for 21 years until his death. The Tigray represent only 6% of the population of Ethiopia. One of the major ethnic groups are the Amhara, who mostly made up the government during the Mengistu dictatorship. Favourable treatment of the Amhara under Mengistu didn't win them many friends, so much so that the TPLF 1968 manifesto declared the Amhara people to be their eternal enemy. And Tedros himself hails from the Tigray region and was a senior member of the party when it came to power. Just how senior was he? Well, this Ethiopian newspaper lists him as the 3rd most important member of the Politburo, which gives the impression he was slightly more important than just a medical administrator. The TPLF was listed as a terrorist organization by the US government in the 90s, and it's still listed as a terrorist organization in the Global Terror Database, because it has this unfortunate habit of carrying out armed assaults in rural areas. The Amhara people under the new government have reported systematic discrimination and human rights abuses. Human Rights Watch in 2010 wrote about how aid in the form of food and fertilizer was being withheld from Amhara villages if they had associations with the opposition party. Other forms of aid denial involved refusing emergency health care to children, which was carried out by the same ministry at the time led by Tedros Adhanom, current director of the WHO. The Amhara People's Union, an activist group based in Washington, issued many other accusations of human rights abuses against the TPLF, including noting that during this time birth rates in the Amhara region was lower than every other region, and that around 2 million Amhara simply disappeared from the population census, which was admitted in Parliament in this video. But not content with denying aid to political dissidents, Tedros also spent a lot of his time as health minister covering up epidemics in Ethiopia. There was a cholera outbreak that spread through the region in 2007, which infected thousands of people in neighbouring countries in East Africa. But when it spread to Ethiopia, the Ministry of Health tactic was to rename the disease AWD, acute watery diarrhea, instead, meaning that on paper all the neighbouring countries had cholera epidemics, but Ethiopia didn't. International organisations were pressured not to call it cholera, even though the UN tested it themselves and found cholera, and were told not to reveal the real number of infected. Another stunning victory for the health minister. Also, the deadly famine that struck Ethiopia in the 1980s, which it's still associated with, is not entirely a thing of the past. The WHO itself, in its reports, after pages and pages of gushing reviews on how great Ethiopia's health sector is, admitted in 2016 that at least 8.6 million people in rural Ethiopia still needed food aid to survive, and said that the situation had barely improved for 4 years, so that after the end of Tedros' illustrious term as health minister, he could boast a mere 8% of the population that would starve to death without foreign aid. And so, after these shining accomplishments in health, Tedros moved on to bigger and better things. In 2012 he became Minister of Foreign Affairs, and under him the government saw a crackdown on journalists and dissidents, including an attempt to extradite Ethiopians that had fled to Yemen in exile to avoid political imprisonment. Yemen and Ethiopia entered negotiations to track down and extradite the Ethiopians in Yemen, and the negotiations were led by Tedros himself. There's even a picture of him here negotiating with the Yemeni foreign minister. One such case was a British citizen called Andy Tsege. He was arrested in Yemen and he was given a death sentence twice by the Ethiopian government. This led to the involvement of the British government, who threatened Ethiopia with denial of aid unless he be granted asylum. Tedros responded to the UK government in person, saying that Tsege was, quote, being treated very well. He even has a laptop. Have you ever heard of a political prisoner with a laptop? End quote. Andy, when he came back to the UK, told a somewhat different story of being tortured for days on end, alongside dozens of other prisoners who reported rape and beating and denial of medical treatment. This is the noble figure that ascended to the role of director of the WHO in 2017. And not being one to miss a chance to defend murderers, Tedros had previously argued against the international trials of Uhuru Kenyatta and his minister, under whose government 1,300 people had been killed after rigged elections. And so, not surprisingly, one of the first things that Tedros did after he took the job was to nominate Robert Mugabe, a goodwill ambassador to WHO. Robert Mugabe, who in the 1980s had ordered the killings of 20,000 people in Zimbabwe. Tedros also, during the coronavirus outbreak, has never missed an opportunity to praise the good governance of China. And given the human rights record of China, it's no wonder he likes them so much. China has funded billions of investment in Ethiopia, building 70% of their roads, financing mass media centers for propaganda, and actually financing the construction of the African Union in Ethiopia. Tedros himself was promoted by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, who financed many large-scale health projects in Ethiopia previously that Tedros had helped facilitate. And so they apparently wanted to promote similar projects on a global scale, and because they'd worked with Tedros in the past, it made sense for them to promote him at the WHO. I'm not here to say that the World Health Organization has never done anything good in its history, but if there was ever an example of the failure of a global institution, the WHO is it. And the sheer scale of its mismanagement means that it should be radically reformed and defunded or completely disbanded. Instead, they're currently advising tech companies like YouTube on how to censor information about the coronavirus. So are you listening, YouTube? This is the kind of thing you're subjugating yourself to. In a sane world, instead of leading a global organization, Tedros and his cronies will be put on trial at the International Criminal Court, tried for his crimes, and if found guilty, spend the rest of his life in prison.